I had just asked my daughter for a simple glass of water, still weak from my gallbladder surgery, when she exploded at me. "We're not your servants, Dad." The venom in her voice cut deeper than any surgeon's blade. But what happened next would teach her a lesson about respect that she'll carry for the rest of her life. Little did Evangeline know that her father had one quiet move prepared that would change everything forever. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. "Could you bring me some water, sweetheart?" The words barely left my lips as I settled carefully into my old leather armchair. 4 days in Riverside Medical Center had left me drained in ways I'd never experienced. The laparoscopic surgery had gone well, the doctor said, but my 67-year-old body was taking its time recovering from what should have been a routine gallbladder removal. Evangeline froze in the kitchen doorway, her expression shifting from mild irritation to something colder, more calculated. She was 28 now, married to Ronan for 3 years, and they'd been living in my house since their wedding day. The same house I'd worked 60-hour weeks to pay off, the same house where I'd raised her after her mother walked out when Evangeline was 12. "Seriously?" Her voice carried an edge that made my chest tighten with something worse than surgical pain. "I just got home from grocery shopping, and you can't even get yourself a glass of water?" I shifted uncomfortably in the chair, the surgical sites protesting with sharp reminders of recent trauma. "I'm still pretty weak from the surgery, honey. The doctor said to take it easy for Aladar. We're not your servants." The words exploded from her mouth like shrapnel, each syllable designed to wound. "Just because you had some minor procedure doesn't mean we're going to wait on you hand and foot." Minor procedure? I stared at my daughter, my only child, the girl I'd sacrificed everything for, searching for some trace of the little girl who used to bring me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings. The child who'd cried when I worked late, begging me to read her just one more bedtime story. Nothing. Her face held the same expression she might reserve for a panhandler asking for spare change. Ronan didn't even look up from his phone, sprawled across my couch like he owned the place. His silence spoke volumes, complete indifference to his father-in-law's recovery, zero concern for basic human decency. "The kitchen is literally 15 feet away," Evangeline continued, gesturing dismissively toward the sink. "You've got working legs. Use them." I gripped the armrests of my chair, pushing myself up slowly. The incision site screamed in protest, sending waves of pain across my abdomen. My vision wavered for a moment, and I had to pause halfway between sitting and standing, gripping the chair back for support. "Easy there, old man," Ronan finally spoke, his voice dripping with mock concern. "Don't want you falling and making more work for us." More work? As if caring for the man who'd provided them with free housing, free utilities, and countless financial support over the years was some unbearable burden that had been thrust upon them. The kitchen felt like miles away instead of just across the room. Each step toward the kitchen was a negotiation between my will and my body's limitations. Behind me, I could hear Evangeline's exasperated scythe, same sound she used to make when I'd ask her to clean her room as a teenager. "Next thing you know, he'll want us to cook his meals too," she muttered to Ronan, not caring that I could hear every word. "Don't give him ideas," Ronan chuckled, that dry laugh that held no real warmth. I reached the counter and gripped its edge, the cool granite steadying me while I processed what I'd just witnessed. This wasn't stress from my surgery or temporary frustration. This was who they really were when they thought I was too weak to matter. The water tasted bitter, though it came from the same filtration system I'd installed 3 years ago, another expense I'd covered without question. As I filled the glass, memories flooded back like scenes from someone else's life. 28 years ago, I'd been a different man, fresher, more optimistic, believing that hard work and sacrifice were investments in family happiness. When Margaret left use, abandoning 12-year-old Evangeline with nothing more than a hastily written note about finding herself, I'd made a choice. 2 jobs instead of 1. 60-hour weeks at the construction company, plus weekend handyman work to make ends meet. Evangeline's college tuition at Portland State, 47, 0 over 4 years. I'd emptied my retirement account without hesitation. Her wedding to Ronan, 23, 0 for a single day of celebration. When Ronan's graphic design business failed 2 years ago and they faced eviction from their apartment, who had opened his doors? When Evangeline wanted to pursue her yoga instructor certification last year, who had paid the 3-0 course fee? The same man they now treated like an inconvenient stranger who'd wandered into their house uninvited. I turned around slowly, deliberately, not just because the pain demanded it, but because I needed time to study these 2 people I'd apparently never really known. Evangeline was scrolling through her phone, already dismissing our interaction. Ronan had found some cooking show to watch, his feet propped up on my coffee table like he was relaxing in his own living room. Which, in their minds, it was. I walked back to my chair, each step heavy with understanding. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows I'd replaced last summer, another expense, another gesture of generosity toward people who saw my kindness as weakness. Settling back into my chair, I took another sip of water. It still tasted bitter, but now there was something else mixed in, something that felt dangerously close to clarity. They had no idea what was coming, but I was beginning to understand exactly what kind of man I needed to become for whatever years I had left. The next few days established a pattern that would have been comical if it weren't so devastating. Each request, no matter how small, was met with increasing hostility and entitlement. "Evangeline, could you help me reach that medication on the top shelf?" I'd asked on Wednesday morning, my arm still too weak to stretch above my head without triggering sharp pains across my abdomen. "God, Dad, you're so helpless," she'd responded, slamming the pill bottle down beside me with enough force to make me flinch. "When are you going to stop milking this surgery thing?" Milking it? The doctor had specifically said 7 to 10 days of limited activity, and I was only on day 6. Thursday brought the grocery incident. I'd offered to contribute money for food shopping, knowing my dietary restrictions required some specific items for proper healing. Bland foods, easy-to-digest options, nothing too complex for my recovering digestive system. "We're not running a nursing home," Ronan had announced, counting the cash I'd handed him like I'd insulted him by offering it. "If you want special food, figure it out yourself." But Friday morning delivered the moment that crystallized everything. I'd woken up dizzy, likely from the pain medications, and had called out for help getting to the bathroom safely. The surgical sites were still tender, and I'd been warned about the dangers of falling during recovery. "Are you kidding me right now?" Evangeline's voice carried the kind of disgust usually reserved for discovering something rotten. "You're a grown man. Walk yourself to the bathroom." I'd made it on my own, gripping walls and furniture, but the humiliation burned deeper than any physical pain. In my own house, the house where I'd nursed Evangeline through countless childhood illnesses, brought her soup during college flu seasons, and stayed up all night when she'd called crying about relationship problems in that same house, I was being treated like a burden for needing basic human assistance during medical recovery. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Every interaction revealed the same truth. They'd stopped seeing me as a person who chose to be generous and started viewing me as an obligation, free source of money, housing, and support. My value to them was purely transactional, and now that I temporarily couldn't provide services, I'd become an inconvenience. That Friday afternoon, as I sat in my chair listening to them discuss weekend plans that involved spending money I'd given them for necessities, something shifted inside me. The hurt was transforming into something colder, more calculating. I thought about all the sacrifices, all the times I'd said yes without question, all the opportunities I'd given up to ensure their comfort and security. And I realized that gratitude had somewhere along the way hardened into entitlement, and entitlement had blossomed into contempt. They were about to learn that contempt was a luxury they couldn't afford. My chest tightened, whether from the surgical recovery or the weight of understanding. I couldn't tell. But for the first time since coming home from the hospital, I felt something that resembled strength returning. Not physical strength, but something more dangerous, the clarity that comes when someone finally understands exactly what they're dealing with. That evening, I made my way carefully to my bedroom, each step reminding me that my body was still healing even if my illusions had shattered completely. The bedroom had always been my sanctuary, the place where Margaret and I had planned our future before she decided she didn't want one with us. I closed the door and leaned against it, needing the privacy to process what I was about to remember. The dresser drawer stuck slightly as I pulled it open, revealing a manila folder I hadn't touched in 3 years. Inside were documents that told the story of the biggest financial decision of my life. September 15th, 2021, just 2 months after Evangeline's wedding, when she and Ronan were struggling to find affordable housing in Portland's impossible rental market. I remembered the conversation vividly, my daughter crying over the phone about how they couldn't find anything decent under $20 a month, how Ronan's new business wasn't generating enough income yet, how they might have to move back in with his parents in Ohio. The house deed transfer papers lay before me like evidence of my own naivety. 2,847 Oakwood Drive, Portland, Oregon, transferred from Vincent Theodore Blackwood to Evangeline Rose Blackwood Sullivan. Purchase price, $340. Zero. My life savings plus a mortgage I'd planned to pay off over the next 15 years. Dad, this is too much, Evangeline had whispered that day, tears streaming down her face as we sat in the lawyer's office. We can't let you do this. But I'd insisted. Family takes care of family, sweetheart. Your mother might not have stayed to see you grow up, but I'll make sure you never have to worry about having a home. Ronan had shaken my hand with what seemed like genuine gratitude, promising that I'd always have a place here, that they'd take care of me when I got older. You'll never be alone, Mr. Blackwood. We're family now. Those promises felt like smoke now, dissipating in the harsh light of their current behavior. I spread out the financial records across my bed. The down payment, $68. Zero from my retirement fund. The monthly mortgage payments I'd been covering, $847. Property taxes, homeowner's insurance, maintenance costs all coming from my pension and Social Security checks. They lived here completely free, had never contributed a single dollar toward the house payment, utilities, or upkeep. Even after the transfer, I'd continued paying everything. They'd asked for time to get established before taking over the financial responsibilities. That was 3 years ago. 3 years of free housing while I lived on the remainder of my fixed income. 3 years of them treating this place like their personal kingdom while I paid for the privilege of being their unwelcome guest. The medical bills from my surgery sat in another folder. 23. Zero even after insurance. Money I'd have to find somehow, while they planned weekend shopping trips and talked about redecorating their kitchen. I gathered the papers slowly, my surgical sites protesting with each movement. Tomorrow, I would make some phone calls. It was time to understand exactly what legal options I had and what mistakes I might have made in my eagerness to provide for my daughter's future. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that only comes after a sleepless night of decision-making. I had 2 phone numbers written on a piece of paper beside my bed. Dr. Martinez's office to check on my recovery progress, and Franklin Associates, the law firm that had handled the house transfer 3 years ago. But first, I needed to conduct one final test. Evangeline and Ronan had left around 9:30 for their weekly errands-out routine that typically involved spending money at Target, getting coffee at that expensive place downtown, and browsing furniture stores for things they couldn't afford but expected me to eventually buy. Perfect. I had about 3 hours. When they returned around 1 p.m., arms loaded with shopping bags and takeout containers, I was positioned strategically in the living room, not helpless or pleading, but observant, ready to document their behavior with the cold calculation of someone gathering evidence. How was your morning out? I asked, keeping my voice genuinely interested. Fine. Evangeline's response carried the same dismissive tone I'd grown to recognize, but now I heard it differently, not as a daughter's casual reply, but as evidence of contempt. They moved through the house like owners returning to their domain, and I waited until they'd settled their belongings before making my request. Timing mattered for this final test. Could you grab me a glass of water while you're up? I'm still feeling pretty weak today. The reaction was immediate and perfect. Evangeline stopped mid-motion, her face shifting from neutral to annoyed in the space of a heartbeat. Can't you get it yourself? You've been sitting there all morning. Ronan looked up from unpacking what appeared to be expensive craft beer. Seriously, Vincent, you can't keep expecting us to wait on you forever. The surgery was like a week ago. I maintained my calm tone, though internally I was cataloging every cruel word. I was hoping you might show a little consideration for your father who's still recovering from surgery. Enough with the guilt trips. Ronan's voice carried the edge of someone whose convenience had been threatened. You're not dying. Stop acting like you are. Evangeline nodded in agreement, setting down her purse with deliberate force. We have our own lives, Dad. We can't drop everything every time you want something. Every time I want something? As if asking for basic human kindness from the people living rent-free in the house I was still paying for was some unreasonable demand. I stood slowly, making sure they could see the effort it took, the way my hand pressed against my abdomen where the surgical site still ached. I see. So asking for help from my family is unreasonable. When you can help yourself? Yes. Evangeline's words came out sharp and final. We're not your personal servants. There it was. The same phrase, the same contempt, the same complete lack of empathy or gratitude. They hadn't changed. If anything, they seemed more comfortable with their cruelty, as if my surgery had given them permission to stop pretending they cared. I walked to the kitchen and filled my glass, each step deliberate and measured. Behind me, I could hear them resuming their normal routine, Evangeline sorting through shopping bags, Ronan settling into my recliner with the TV remote. The water tasted exactly like it had a week ago, but this time I wasn't drinking it with the bitter taste of broken expectations. This time I was drinking it with the satisfaction of a man who had just gathered all the evidence he needed. Monday morning found me in the office of Franklin, Associates at precisely 9 a.m. Theodore Franklin, the same lawyer who'd handled my house transfer, greeted me with the professional warmth I remembered from our previous dealings. "Vincent, good to see you. Though I was sorry to hear about your surgery. How are you feeling?" I settled into the chair across from his desk, grateful that my strength had returned enough to handle business properly. "Getting better, thank you." "Theodore, I need to discuss some concerns about the house transfer we completed 3 years ago." His eyebrows lifted slightly, but his expression remained professionally neutral. "Of course. Let me pull that file." Documents rustled as he arranged papers across his desk. "The Oakwood Drive property. What specific concerns do you have?" I had rehearsed this moment during my wakeful hours, choosing words that would convey necessity without revealing too much emotion. I need to understand what legal protections were built into the transfer, given that circumstances have changed significantly since then. Theodore spread out the deed documents, pointing to specific clauses. "Well, Vincent, we structured this as a life estate deed with reversionary rights. Standard practice for family transfers, especially given your age and the substantial value involved." My heart rate increased, though whether from surgical recovery or sudden hope, I couldn't determine. What does that mean exactly? "It means that while Evangeline holds legal title, you retain a life estate in the property, the right to live there for the remainder of your life. Additionally, the deed includes specific protections for the life tenant." He traced his finger across dense legal text. "Failure to provide reasonable care, harassment of the life tenant, or material breach of family obligations can trigger a reversion clause." The words swam before my eyes as their implications crystallized. 3 years ago, Theodore had insisted on these protections, explaining them as standard safeguards that I'd barely listened to in my eagerness to provide for Evangeline's future. "How quickly could such a reversion take effect?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "With proper documentation of changed circumstances, 30 days from filing notice. You'd need to demonstrate material breach of the life estate conditions." Theodore's tone remained matter-of-fact, as if we were discussing routine paperwork rather than reclaiming my life. I thought about the past week's confrontations, months of increasingly entitled behavior, becoming a stranger in my own home while continuing to pay all the expenses. Material breach seemed like an understatement. What kind of documentation would be required? Evidence of the changed circumstances. Witness statements if available. Documentation of harassment or failure to provide reasonable care during illness. Evidence that they violated the implied agreement of family support. Through the window, I could see normal Monday morning activities continuing while my world quietly shifted on its axis. The house felt different now, knowing that it wasn't as simple as Evangeline thought, that I wasn't as powerless as they believed. "Theodore, I need you to prepare the documentation for a potential reversion claim. I want to understand all my options before I make any decisions." Theodore nodded with the wisdom of someone who'd guided other families through similar crossroads. "I can have the paperwork ready by Wednesday." "Are we talking about immediate action, or are you exploring options?" "I'm going to give them one final opportunity to remember what family means," I said carefully, "but I want to be prepared for the outcome I'm expecting." Wednesday evening found us in the living room, the three of us arranged like actors in a play none of us had auditioned for. I held the manila envelope from Theodore's office, documents that would change everything, waiting for the perfect moment to reclaim what had always been mine. Evangeline was curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone with the casual indifference I'd grown to despise. Ronan sat in my recliner chair, remote control in hand like a scepter of ownership. "Evangeline, Ronan, I need to discuss something important with both of you." My voice carried an authority they hadn't heard before, not the weak, pleading tone of a sick old man asking for water, but the firm command of someone holding all the cards. They exchanged glances as they shifted their attention toward me. Evangeline's expression showed mild annoyance, as if I were interrupting something more important than about to deliver the most significant news of their adult lives. I held up the legal documents, making sure they could see the official letterhead and formal formatting. "I've been reviewing the deed transfer we completed 3 years ago. There are some conditions you've been failing to meet." The silence that followed was profound. Evangeline's phone screen went dark as her grip loosened. Ronan's thumb froze over the remote control. "What are you talking about?" Evangeline's voice carried the first hint of uncertainty I'd heard from her since my surgery. "I'm talking about the legal reality you chose to ignore." I unfolded the first document and began reading. Life estate deed with reversionary provisions. The life tenant that's me retains the right to reasonable care and respectful treatment from the title holder. Ronan sat up straighter. "Wait, what does that mean?" "It means that while you hold title to this house, I have legal rights that you've been violating. Specifically, the right to reasonable care during illness, the right to respectful treatment in my own home, and the right to basic human courtesy from people benefiting from my generosity." Evangeline's face had gone pale. "Dad, this is crazy. We live here. This is our home. You live here at my discretion, which you've forfeited by treating me like an unwelcome stranger." I continued reading from the legal document. Material breach of implied conditions, harassment of life tenant, failure to provide reasonable care during medical recovery. "But we do take care of you," Ronan protested, his voice rising with desperation. "Taking care of me?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. "You've refused to bring me water after surgery, told me I was milking it when I asked for basic assistance, and treated every request for help like an unreasonable burden." Evangeline jumped to her feet. "That's not. We were just. You can't be serious about this." "Deadly serious." I stood slowly, making sure they could see I was no longer the weak, helpless man they'd been dismissing. "You have 72 hours to decide whether you want to be family members who show basic respect and kindness, or tenants who need to find alternative housing." The room fell silent except for Evangeline's increasingly rapid breathing. The legal documents sat between us like a bridge they couldn't cross, separating their old world of entitlement from the new reality of consequences. "Where would we go?" Ronan asked, his voice smaller now. "That's something you should have considered before deciding your father wasn't worth basic human decency." I moved toward the hallway, leaving them to process their new circumstances. Behind me, I could hear Evangeline beginning to cry and Ronan's voice rising as he started making urgent phone calls. But this was just the beginning. They still didn't understand the full scope of what they'd lost. The next morning brought desperate attempts at damage control that would have been impressive if they weren't so transparently manipulative. I woke to the smell of bacon and coffee the first time either of them had cooked anything for me since I'd returned from the hospital. Evangeline appeared in my doorway carrying a breakfast tray, her eyes red from crying, wearing the same apologetic expression she'd perfected as a teenager after breaking curfew. "Dad, I made your favorite breakfast," she said, setting the tray on my nightstand with theatrical care. "Bacon, scrambled eggs, and that whole wheat toast you like." I sat up carefully, noting that she'd even included fresh orange juice and my morning medications arranged in a small dish. The performance was remarkable, devoted daughter caring for her recovering father. "Thank you," I said simply, making no reference to the previous evening's confrontation. Over the next 48 hours, their behavior transformed completely. Suddenly, I couldn't ask for anything without them rushing to comply. Water appeared before I requested it. Evangeline fluffed pillows I didn't need fluffed. Ronan offered to drive me to medical appointments I hadn't scheduled. "Dad, you shouldn't be reaching for that," Evangeline said Thursday afternoon, practically leaping across the room to retrieve a book from a low shelf. "You're still recovering. Let me get everything for you." The same woman who'd called me helpless 4 days earlier now treated me like I was made of spun glass. Friday brought flowers, expensive ones from that upscale florist downtown. "Just wanted you to know how much we appreciate everything you've done for us," Ronan said, arranging them in my grandmother's crystal vase with the careful attention of someone handling explosive materials. But I'd spent too many years raising Evangeline to fall for teenage manipulation tactics, even when employed by adults facing homelessness. "The legal deadline stands," I told them Friday evening as they finished preparing dinner, another first since my surgery. "Your behavior this week proves you're capable of basic human decency. The question is why it took the threat of eviction to motivate it." Evangeline's face crumpled. "Dad, please. We know we made mistakes. We know we treated you badly. But we can change. We have changed." "Have you? Or are you just temporarily modifying your behavior to avoid consequences?" The question hung between us like a test they couldn't study for. Ronan stepped forward, his posture now respectful rather than confrontational. "Mr. Blackwood, Vincent, I take full responsibility for influencing Evangeline's attitude. I was wrong to treat you with disrespect in your own home. This house isn't just my home, Ronan. It's my life savings, my retirement security, my future medical care fund. Every month, I pay $1,847 in mortgage payments, plus taxes, insurance, and maintenance. You've lived here 3 years without contributing a single dollar. The color drained from both their faces as the financial reality hit them. We didn't know, Evangeline whispered. You didn't know because you never asked. You assumed someone else would handle the adult responsibilities while you enjoyed the benefits. Saturday morning arrived with more desperate gestures. Evangeline had cleaned the entire house, something that typically required my nagging. Ronan had mowed the lawn and was working on household repairs I'd mentioned months ago. But performative kindness motivated by fear isn't the same as genuine respect born from love and gratitude. The 72 hours were almost up. Monday morning brought Theodore Franklin to my door at precisely 10 a.m., carrying his worn leather briefcase and the satisfied expression of a lawyer who just finalized paperwork that would change lives. Vincent, the reversion documentation is complete. Are you ready to proceed? I nodded, leading him into the living room where Evangeline and Ronan sat nervously on the couch. Their weekend of desperate domestic performance had failed to change my mind, and they seemed to understand that their time was up. Good morning, folks, Theodore said professionally, settling into a chair and opening his briefcase. I'm here to serve you with official legal notice regarding the property deed for 2,847 Oakwood Drive. He spread documents across the coffee table with practiced efficiency. Notice of life estate violation and deed reversion. The life tenant, Vincent Blackwood, is exercising his legal right to reclaim full title to this property based on material breach of implied conditions. Evangeline's hands trembled as she picked up the papers. What does this mean exactly? It means, Theodore explained with matter-of-fact precision, that your title to this property is being revoked due to your failure to provide reasonable care and respectful treatment to the life tenant during his medical recovery. Ronan leaned forward desperately. But we've been taking care of him all week. We've been doing everything right. After being confronted with legal consequences, I interjected. Your recent behavior doesn't erase weeks of treating me like an unwelcome burden in my own home. Theodore continued reading from the legal document. Specific violations include refusal to provide basic assistance during medical recovery, verbal harassment of the life tenant, treating requests for reasonable care as unreasonable burdens, and failure to maintain the respectful family relationship implied in the original gift deed. You have 30 days to vacate the premises, Theodore announced, his words carrying the weight of legal finality. During that time, Mr. Blackwood will be consulting with his accountant to determine what financial compensation you owe for 3 years of free housing. Evangeline's face went white. Financial compensation? I pulled out a folder of receipts and bank statements, 36 months of mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance, utilities, and maintenance costs. Everything you should have been contributing as homeowners but never did. The numbers laid out across the table told a devastating story. 78, 450. 2 in total housing costs they'd avoided while I lived on my reduced pension and Social Security. We don't have that kind of money, Ronan whispered. Then you should have thought about that before treating your benefactor with contempt, Theodore replied calmly. The life estate violation makes this a clear case of unjust enrichment. Evangeline began crying not the manipulative tears of her weekend performance, but the genuine despair of someone finally understanding what they'd lost. Dad, please, we're family. We can work this out. Family members don't refuse basic care during illness. They don't treat generosity as weakness to be exploited. I stood up, feeling stronger than I had since my surgery. Not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. The clarity of justice finally being served was more therapeutic than any medication. The legal process has begun. Theodore will handle all communications going forward. They sat in stunned silence as Theodore packed his briefcase and prepared to leave. 30 days to find new housing, plus a debt they couldn't afford for 3 years of taking advantage of my generosity. The house felt different already, not like a place where I was merely tolerated, but like a home where I belonged. That evening, as boxes began appearing in the hallway and desperate phone calls filled the air, I sat Evangeline and Ronan down for a conversation they weren't prepared to have. Before you leave, there's something you need to understand about this house. I retrieved a locked metal box from my bedroom closet documents I'd never shared, papers that told the real story of how I'd been able to afford such a generous gift 3 years ago. Dad, we know you worked hard to buy this place, Evangeline said, her voice hollow with exhaustion. We know you sacrificed for us. Do you? I opened the box and spread its contents across the kitchen table. Medical bills, loan documents, second mortgage papers, all bearing dates from 2018 to 2021. These are the documents from your grandfather Vincent's final illness. Evangeline stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. Her face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then a dawning horror that was painful to witness. Grandpa Vincent's pancreatic cancer treatment cost $127,000 over 8 months, I said quietly. Insurance covered some, but the experimental treatments, the private specialists, the round-the-clock care he needed that came from my savings. I pointed to the financial statements that showed my retirement account balance dropping from 94,000 to 13,000 between January and September 2018. I spent everything trying to save him. Every dollar I'd planned to use for my own future. Every penny I'd saved for retirement. Because family takes care of family. Ronan reached for the documents with shaking hands. But then how did you buy us the house? I pulled out another set of papers loan documents. Second mortgage papers. Reverse equity agreements. I mortgaged my future. Took loans against my pension. Borrowed against my Social Security. Put myself in debt that I'll be paying until I die. The silence that followed was absolute. Evangeline's face had turned ashen as the full weight of my sacrifice crystallized. You went into debt to buy us a house, she whispered. I gave you my future security because I believed family was worth any sacrifice. I believed that when I got older, when I got sick, when I needed help, you would remember what I'd given up for you. The loan papers rustled as Evangeline picked them up with trembling fingers. We didn't know. You didn't know because I didn't want you to feel guilty about living in a house that cost me my retirement security. I wanted you to see it as a gift from a loving father, not as something purchased with my future. Ronan put his head in his hands. Oh God, what have we done? You treated the man who sacrificed his retirement to provide your housing like he was an inconvenience for asking for a glass of water after surgery. Evangeline made a sound that was part sob, part gasp. Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. Your grandfather died believing his medical bills were worth it because family takes care of family. He never knew that paying for his care would cost me everything I'd saved for my own old age. I gathered the documents back into their neat pile. He died believing that his grandson would never let his father face poverty or neglect because of the sacrifices made for family. The moral weight of the revelation settled over them like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just about legal ownership or family disputes anymore. This was about violating the sacred trust of multiple generations, about spitting on sacrifices they'd never even known were made. What can we do? Evangeline whispered. How can we possibly make this right? I looked at my daughter, me broken, desperate daughter who had finally understood the full scope of what she'd low stand, felt something that might have been pity mixed with the satisfaction of justice finally being served. You have 27 days, I said simply. 3 weeks later, I stood in my living room watching the last of their belongings disappear into a rented moving truck. The transformation had been remarkable not just in them, but in the entire atmosphere of the house. Gone was the entitled arrogance, the casual cruelty, the assumption that my generosity was their birthright. In its place was something I'd never seen from them before. Genuine remorse mixed with the hollow exhaustion of people who had learned what it meant to lose everything through their own choices. Evangeline approached me with the house keys, her movements careful and deliberate, as if she were walking through a house that might collapse at any moment. The past 3 weeks had aged Herstress lines around her eyes, a weariness in her posture that spoke of sleepless nights and desperate apartment hunting. Dad, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, I need you to know that I understand what we did, what I did, and I understand what you sacrificed that we never even knew about. I took the keys from her trembling fingers. They felt warm in my palm, heavy with the weight of reclaimed ownership and hard-earned justice. I know you do, I replied. Ronan appeared in the doorway, moving boxes toward the truck with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had accepted defeat. His graphic design business had finally started showing profits, but their new apartment would cost $900 a month, money that would have been savings if they'd treated me with basic human decency. Mr. Blackwood, he said, setting down a box and extending his hand toward me. I want you to know that I take full responsibility for my part in this. I influenced Evangeline's behavior, and I participated in treating you badly when you needed us most. I shook his hand briefly. Now you know what it means to pay for housing. The words carried the weight of perfect justice. They had treated me like an unwelcome burden in the house I was paying for. Now they would learn what it felt like to work for a roof over their heads. Theodore Franklin arrived as the moving truck pulled away, carrying final paperwork that would restore my name to the deed as sole owner. No more life estate complications. No more shared ownership. No more depending on their goodwill for security in my own home. "Everything's finalized, Vincent," he said, handing me the documents. "The deed reversion is complete, and the financial settlement agreement is signed." They'd agreed to pay me $300 monthly for 5 years, a fraction of what they truly owed, but enough to help with my medical bills and future care needs. More importantly, it was acknowledgement of their debt, both financial and moral. As Theodore's car disappeared down Oakwood Drive, I walked through my house, truly my house again, room by room. The master bedroom where I'd struggled with the revelation of their contempt. The kitchen where they'd refused to bring me water. The living room where they'd treated my recovery like an inconvenience. All mine again. All quiet. All peaceful. I settled into my leather recliner and looked around at the space I'd nearly lost through my own generosity. The afternoon sun slanted through windows I'd paid to replace, illuminating furniture I'd worked years to afford, in a house that represented every sacrifice I'd ever made for family. My phone buzzed with a text message from Evangeline. "Dad, I know sorry isn't enough, but I want you to know that every day for the rest of my life, I'll remember what you gave up for us and how badly we repaid your love. I'll never forgive myself for treating you that way." I read the message twice, then set the phone aside. Forgiveness might come someday, but justice had already been served. The lesson had been learned, the consequences had been faced, and the natural order had been restored. Outside, Portland continued its gentle progression toward evening, and I was home. Not just in the house, but in the peace that comes from standing up for yourself and discovering that you're stronger than anyone, including yourself, believed possible. If you enjoyed this story of justice and family consequences, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Share your thoughts about family boundaries and the importance of respecting those who sacrifice for us.